Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about impeachment, Russia, the Democrats, and the Democrats' incredibly inconsistent message about Russia. All right, so let's talk about it. All right, so basically, I feel very bad for the Democrats. The Democrats, they're really having a tough time now with this impeachment question, right? There are a lot of Democrats who are really excited about the idea of impeaching Donald Trump. And they're like, hey, let's get him out, right? You know, and it's really it's an incredibly interesting discussion. It really is. It's absolutely fascinating. So let's talk about it, right? So one, I'll give you my summary, right? I agree with what USA Today and I think even Trevor Noah has already brought forward, and I think most people who are looking at this clearly understand this. Excuse me. So here it is. Basically, if you try to, what's the crux of all this, right? So here's the 1, 2, 3, right? Russia tries to meddle in our election by making mean Facebook posts. Oh, boo-hoo. Like, you know. So one, Americans have a hard time caring about that, right? Like, you know, we lived through 9/11. Like, you know, there were like 3,000 people killed on our own soil. We don't really care about mean Facebook posts. Like, this ain't the worst we've been through. It's, in fact, you know, when you've been America and you've dealt with a tragedy at the scale of 9/11, you really aren't going to care a whole lot about mean Facebook posts. It's really not going to come on high on your list of threats, right? Like, it's hard to even take it seriously. It's like if you've been stabbed by someone and then someone comes up and hits you with a pool noodle. Like, what are you going to care, right? Like, it just doesn't matter, right? So I think for many Americans it doesn't matter, but for the Dems, it matters to them incredibly much. And the reason why is I don't think them care that Russians made a bunch of Facebook posts. What they care about is the Russians tried to meddle with our independent election, right? And then they believe that Donald Trump colluded with them, right, to get information against his candidates and other things, right? And then the Democrats believe that Donald Trump obstructed the investigation into what he had done in response to working with the Russians and in response to their attempt to meddle in our free election, right? So for the Dems, all those things, obstruction, collusion, and Russia's own attempt to meddle in our independent election, I don't think what the Dems care about is, oh my gosh, here's a way to impeach Trump. The Dems desperately want Trump out in any way they can do it, right? Now, here's the kicker. The smartest person in the Dems camp at this point is Nancy Pelosi. She sees this a mile away. If you attempt this, you're going to fail because nobody in America cares about, you know, getting whacked with a pool noodle. And that's what Russia's mean Facebooks were. You can't get people to care about them. People do not care about that nonsense, right? So maybe a few like hardcore Dems do, but again, they don't even care about that issue. They care about the possibility of impeaching Trump, right? All right. So basically, you have this issue of wanting to impeach Trump, but Nancy Pelosi she sees it a mile away. She's like, okay, this is going to be really hard to land. It's going to be incredibly difficult to impeach him because one, the thing that was done wrong wasn't even done by him. It was done by the Russians. And then as far as him getting collusion, getting information from the Russians, you know, Americans aren't going to care about that either. And the reason why is because of the Democrats. The Democrats have been crying from the skies for 50 years that America's fear of the Soviet Union. This happened in McCarthyism. The Democrats were like, hey, don't worry. They're not a threat to us. We can have artists and writers and a whole bunch of people who have socialist leanings. We could even have a presidential candidate who has socialist leanings. We could even have a presidential candidate, Bernie Sanders, who was investigated for being in cahoots with the Russian government, right? And it's not going to matter, right? So that's the point, is now the Democrats getting upset about Russia when since 1955, you know, like the McCarthy era, and that's, by the way, oh my gosh, that's 60 years, right? For 6 decades, they've been saying, if you're worried about the Soviet Union or the Russia, you're just a fear-mongering patriot, right? And patriotism is foolish and no longer necessary. In fact, on the Democrat side, we call patriotism jingoism, right? So basically, for 60 years, the Democrats have been telling anybody who will listen, if you're worried about, the threat of the Soviet Union, the threat of socialism, the threat of Russia, well, you're just a square, right? They literally laugh, Hollywood and the Dems and all the left just laughed and laughed at people who thought that the Russians and the Soviets and socialism were a threat. Right? Oh, guess what? Now in 2019, the Democrats have a new opinion that Russia's dangerous. Oh, well, guess what? If you've been saying Russia's dangerous for 2 years, and for 60 you've been saying they're nothing, and it's fine to have socialist candidates running right in America who have an incredible overlap with communism, right? Nobody's going to listen to you, right? You can't sing one song for 60 years and sing a new song for 2 years. It's absurd, right? And so that's the issue. It's every Democrat, they want you to believe two things. Here's why everybody's laughing at the Democrats on what they have to say about Russia now. They're saying it came out as a news story very recently that Bernie Sanders was investigated by our own government for alignment with Russia. Right? We did that investigation. They're like, hey, we got a socialist. We have a socialist senator in America who, the overlap between his socialism and communism is a whole lot of the circle, right? Maybe we should investigate that, right? And then, so the media brings this forward, and every Dem lines up and goes, this is absurd. How dare anyone think that that Bernie Sanders is a threat to America because many of his opinions align with communism. What a ridiculous idea, right? And then they're like, oh, by the way, Russia's really dangerous, and all these Facebook posts, that's a real threat, right? Come on, it's you're talking out two sides of your mouth, right? If Russia and the Soviet Union and socialism overall, if the Soviet Union and Russia would use, right? Soviet Union, of course, was gone since the late 90s, and now it's Russia, right? But it's the same people, right? It's literally the same people, right? As far as the leadership. So basically, if you think that they're going to that, so the Democrats are trying to sell a song that says, guess what? Russia will absolutely try to use Facebook to take over a nation, but they wouldn't use a senator as a Manchurian candidate, right? It's ridiculous, right? The thing is, that's the point, right? The reality is, I don't believe for 1 second that Bernie Sanders is a Manchurian candidate. I think he's just a socialist, right? And so I don't think, and there's really no threat. There's no threat from Bernie Sanders, right? He can have socialist ideas and be in our government. And the reason why is we have a strong populace. We have a strong people, right? We know what to watch out for and what not to. Guess what? The Facebook posts are exactly the same, right? Basically, yeah. So Russia attempted to sway our election by using Facebook posts. But the thing is, Americans, they are listening to the Democrats and what the Democrats have said for 60 years. The Soviet Union and Russia is really no threat. They can do whatever they want. We're our own independent, strong people, and we're going to make sure that we make our own decisions. And we did make our own decisions. We elected Donald Trump. Russia didn't elect Donald Trump, but a couple of mean Facebook posts didn't put Donald Trump in. A bunch of people who wanted Donald Trump to be president did, right? And the reality is, we all know as adult people that if we want to ignore Facebook posts, we can, right? And that's the issue. Is the reality is, I don't think for 1 minute that Bernie Sanders is a communist, right, or aligned himself with communism. But if you're the Democrats and you're saying, hey, don't worry, the Russians are not really trying to dismantle our nation, and the idea that they would plant a Manchurian candidate as a senator, you can't say that at the same time you're saying take these Facebook posts really seriously, right? It's just, it's ludicrous. And so that's the issue is and the other issue is Nancy Pelosi fully understands it, 100% correct. If you come with this nonsense impeachment attempt, right? Based on something that Americans absolutely do not care about. Mean Facebook posts after we lived through 9/11, nobody gives two rat tails. They really don't, right? So like, you know, it's ridiculous, right? So basically, if the American, so essentially, that's the issue, is you can't say the Russians are dangerous and we need to pay attention to them if if what they did was, sorry, I lost my train there. So basically, if you're trying to impeach with this ridiculous idea that Russia made some Facebook posts, and then Donald Trump didn't handle that correctly, and that's enough to impeach him, right? So Nancy fully understands that's going to fail. And when it does fail, Donald Trump is going to use the failed impeachment attempt to absolutely rally his base, look like a strong conqueror of the Democrats. It's going to give him 20 points in the election, right? Nancy sees this. She sees this. And also, in addition to that, they don't even have time, right? They don't really have time to get through the election process, and it's going to look incredibly stilted because it's coming right up against the election, right? So that's the reality. Is I feel bad for the Democrats because nobody's going to listen to them on Russia about anything, and the reality is you can't say for 60 years that Russia and the Soviet Union, making them boogeymen, is bad and unfair, and only a square and only a conservative would do this, right? And then all of a sudden get all uppity and frightened and get this idea that Russia's dangerous because they made some Facebook posts. It's just, so the Dems really have to have one message on Russia, and they don't, which means that anything they say on Russia really doesn't get listened to. That's my opinion. I'd love to hear your opinion. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.